Welcome back to Free Speech Nation with me, Josh Howie. A new report entitled Everyday Cancellation has been published and was revealed the shocking impact of trans ideology on the publishing industry. The report concluded that gender ideology is now dominant in the publishing industry, with opposing views being silenced, with discrimination and harassment towards those with gender-critical views now being commonplace. Well, here to tell us more is the social scientist and researcher Matilda Gosling. Welcome to the show, Matilda.
Thank you for having me.
Big round of applause. Before we actually get into the interview, I have to say that I messaged you earlier to say, well, I want to say, do you have the address? And what I wrote was, do you have a dress? So
no dress.
I would like to
sorry.
apologise for that.
I'm not a dress person.
So this week, I came along to the report's launch, and there was a Q&A, and frankly, I found it very disturbing and quite depressing. Now, could you tell me the gist of what the report is actually about?
Yeah, of course. So it was commissioned by Sex Matters and Seen in Publishing to look at what the impact of gender identity beliefs are on the publishing sector. So looking particularly at the effect it's had on the general environment and then the impact on individuals that have been caught up in it as well. And so I did a review of policies that have been put out by 21 publishers and also some of the agencies and commissioning organisations as well. Did a social media review, a review of kind of news coverage, and then 25 interviews with people from across the sector. So authors, agents, publishing staff at all levels, and 7 of those are named in the report, and the remainder chose to remain anonymous because the environment is still so difficult.
That's it. I mean, we've covered some of these reports on this very show, but reading it all together to see the impact, the negative impact on people's lives for just believing and advocating for women's rights and believing there are only 2 sexes, it was disturbing. Yeah,
and it coalesces in some particular areas. So the personal impact, there's been concerns about personal safety, family safety, there have been health impacts, there have been mental health impacts, there's obviously been loss of work, cancellation, deplatforming, and those are all just one tiny section of the report because the impact is obviously much wider because there's a general chilling effect on the commissioning environment and on book sales, book marketing, and on what people are able to say in the workplace and the extent to which they're able to push back on unlawful policies, of which there are quite a few, it seems.
So what do you think it is specifically about the publishing industry that has made it particularly susceptible to gender ideology?
I think there's a bit of an overspill from academia. So academia is basically where it started, this idea that all reality is socially constructed, that there is no such thing as objective truth, objective reality. And I think the kind of close relationship between academic publishing and then obviously other parts of publishing has some effect. Also, the people that come out of universities and then go into the workplace and then replicate the ideas that they've been taught at university once they enter publishing itself. I think it's quite a small industry as well, and it's quite cosy, it's reliant upon personal relationships, and there's an idea that everybody thinks and believes the same thing, and you're not allowed to deviate from that. And if you do deviate from that, you're cast out, as we've seen. So it makes people fall into line because the costs of not falling into line are too great.
And it's also seemed like that there's been a failure of leadership, where maybe they're so far removed, the people who are running the companies, that they've let the lunatics take over the asylum.
I think for leaders, it's a lot easier in the short term to turn away from difficult, contentious issues because obviously, as everybody who's watching this will know, it's become such a point, a kind of cultural touchstone and point of difference among wider society. And if you're managing that within your workplace, it's really difficult. And I think it's much easier just to go, I'm not going to deal with this and I'm going to let it play out in the workplace without actually coming into line and putting into place some clear policies. The problem is that works in the short term. I'm not sure it works in the medium to long term, and there's all sorts of legal, financial, reputational risks that come from allowing a hostile environment to staff that have legally protected beliefs, not ensuring that you're balancing their needs and rights alongside the needs and rights of other members of staff. And we've seen some kind of legal cases starting to play out, and I suspect that if policies and processes aren't brought into line to a greater extent than they have been to date, we're probably going to see more of those, and that those organisational penalties will become clearer, at which point, hopefully, some of the publishers and other organisations, because it's funding bodies, it's others that are involved in the wider cultural sector as well, that they will start to pay attention and actually make sure that they are allowing freedom of speech, that they are ensuring that they are neutral from an institutional perspective, and ensuring that their policies and processes are compliant with the Equality Act, which many aren't.
Well, yeah, they haven't been, and I guess that's the impact that it has on us as a country, on our culture, is that you have this lack of free speech or the ability to support ideas that you might disagree with. And actually you're having the opposite, where you have people who work in publishing who are shutting down these ideas. That impacts what all of us have access to, all the kind of books that we get, right?
Yeah, and I think that plays out again in academia as well. So one of the interviewees that I spoke to who works in academia was saying that the first moment she started asking questions was when she was told by colleagues that there was no debate on this issue, and her response was, we're academics, of course there's debate. Debate is at the heart of everything we do, and that was the point at which she started to ask questions. And then that obviously has its mirroring in publishing more widely, with this idea that if you can't talk about an issue and you can't look at it from a 360-degree perspective, you can't stress test ideas, you can't even challenge something that might have detrimental impacts on women or other people that have kind of these protected views, that actually it all turns a little bit into dust, because you're meant to be this sector that is based on ideas and that is based on challenge, and that all perspectives are open, particularly legally protected ones.
Yeah, you would hope so. And one of the other elements of the report seems to be focusing on children, that a fifth of these books that address trans ideology addressed towards kids.
Yeah. Yes, and I think there's a particular issue with children's publishing. And at the very start of the report, I go into a little bit of background about the beliefs and what they mean. And within that, I cover some of the evidence and the lack of evidence when it comes to children and so-called transition, and looking at some of the data that says that actually children who have a trans identity are 8 times more likely to be on the autistic spectrum. They're much more likely to have been subjected to abuse. They're more likely to grow up to be same-sex attracted. They are more likely to have poor underlying mental health. So there are all sorts of areas that suggest that this is not a permanent underlying state of identity. And we know from kind of developmental research that identity changes and shifts, and the risk is that you turn it into something concrete if it's saying to children that your temporary distress can actually be ameliorated by this kind of identity. And a lot of children's publishing is fostering this idea that if you are in any way unhappy, that the solution may lie in transition, and it paints it as being, I think I used the word sparkly, shiny in the report. It's this kind of glossy idea that's then being sold to, I think, sometimes some very vulnerable children who actually need love and acceptance for who they are, and if they're feeling distress in their bodies, they need support to feel better in them. And actually children's publishing has been contributing to an environment where distress is entrenched and made worse.
Because I sort of assumed that a part of it was ideologically driven, but it seemed like also there's just a fad element to it. And someone was using the example of vampires, and there were just lots of... The negative impact of that was there at the end, was there were just lots of rubbish books about vampires. But of course, the negative implications here for children are far greater.
Yeah, I mean, you can identify as a vampire, but you're probably going to have no long-term negative effects. Unfortunately, the same is not true of a book. So there's a book, for example, called Introducing Teddy, where Teddy starts off as a boy and then marks his transition to being a girl by removing his bow tie and putting it in as a hair clip. So it's this kind of idea that everything is about stereotypes. So children that may not meet these kind of deeply problematic ideas of what it means to be a girl or a boy, that actually they must be in the wrong body, they must need to change something about themselves in order to fit in, rather than saying there are a million different ways to be a girl or a million different ways to be a boy, and actually we can kind of accept them and they're all fine. So I think there is something particularly troubling about children's publishing, and I pulled it out as a discrete section in the report for that reason.
Well, we've seen huge changes, certainly within the UK over the last few years, but it still seems that publishing in particular is captured. I would have assumed that the market would have course-corrected. Have we seen any evidence of that?
I think there are a reducing number of books based on gender identity ideology being published, and perhaps an increasingly open environment for kind of more plural perspectives to be published. And I think that the market will probably catch up very quickly. So one of the things that I did for the research was an analysis of published books and then a link to that sales figures. And according to the analysis that I did, then books based on gender-critical books sell 9 times the number of copies per title as the average book based on gender identity ideology. So you might suspect that at some point commissioning editors will want to see that reflected in their own
huge
sales
advances
figures.
going towards someone writing a book about their transgender and selling very few copies.
Yes.
And then the example I think you give is Helen Joyce's trans book.
Yes.
And selling 100,000 copies around the world?
Yeah, more than that. So I think it's tens of thousands.
I bought 3.
And, yeah, well done. I think I've bought several as well. Yes, and Grace Lavery's book, I think he received quite a substantial advance for, and that went on to sell fewer than 2,000 copies. And that was based on his idea that he was transitioning to be a woman according to his own perception of what it means to be a woman.
Yes, which is we shall not repeat on
Yes.
on a television show. So very quickly, do you think the publishing industry can be saved, is going to be saved? What are the immediate steps that they can take to actually sort themselves out?
I absolutely think it can, because what needs to be done to sort it out is so simple and so basic. So it's about ensuring Equality Act compliance, and that means balancing the needs and rights of different protected characteristics, making sure that all staff have their interests and beliefs looked after. It means employing trainers to provide training on the Equality Act that actually understand what it means and understand the law. It means institutional neutrality, it means freedom of speech, and it means clamping down on abuse. So
Good.
Those are all very basic steps.
And maybe we'll get some better books.
Maybe we will.
That would be
hope.
nice. Well, thank you very much. That's social scientist, researcher Matilda Gosling. Next on Free Speech